My name is Frank Kowalski, and I've been a park ranger at Glacier Bay for 16 years. People ask me why I stay in this cold, empty place. The truth is, after Martha died, I needed somewhere far from everything that reminded me of her. Alaska gave me that distance. I'm 42 now, been here since I left the Navy. Lost 2 fingers on my left hand in a submarine accident back in '49, but that never stopped me from doing my job. My job is watching over this wild place, tracking the seals, reporting weather, and helping folks who get into trouble on the water. My cabin sits 15 miles from the main station at Bartlett Cove. You can only reach it by boat, which suits me fine. I like the quiet. Just me, my radio, and the endless ice. Every week I make a supply run. Every day I send weather reports. It's a simple life. The Tlingit people who lived here first tell stories about these waters. Stories about things that live beneath the ice. Shapeshifters, they call them. Kushtaka. I always figured those were just old tales meant to keep children from wandering too close to the water. I was Navy trained, practical. I believed in what I could see and touch. October of 1965 changed everything. That month, the storms came early. By mid-October, we were getting 18 hours of darkness every day. The temperature dropped to 20 below. The ice started forming thick and fast, making weird shapes in the fjords. I remember sitting in my cabin that first week, listening to the ice crack and groan outside. It made sounds I'd never heard before, almost like voices talking far away. The coffee in my cup would ripple for no reason. My compass started spinning like a toy top. The radio worked most days, but sometimes I'd hear strange voices speaking in what sounded like Tlingit. Problem was, there weren't supposed to be any Tlingit stations broadcasting on our frequency. When I asked about it during my weekly check-in, they said it must be atmospheric interference. That's what I told myself too. The seals were acting strange. Usually, they'd group up in certain spots along the ice floes. But that October, I'd find them scattered around in perfect circles and straight lines, like someone had arranged them on purpose. Some were dead, but not from natural causes. They had bite marks, human bite marks, but way too big for any human mouth I'd ever seen. I should have paid attention to old Tom Kayahat when he stopped by in his fishing boat that third week. He took one look at my seal count charts and shook his head. "Bad waters now, Frank," he said. "The dark months are here. The hungry ones wake up when the ice comes." "What hungry ones?" I asked. Tom pointed toward the deeper fjords where the glaciers met the sea. "Things that used to be men. Things that used to be seals. Now they're something else. Something always hunting." I offered him coffee and asked him to explain, but he was already untying his boat. "You should leave too," he called as he pushed off. "Come back when the sun returns." I laughed and waved goodbye. Tom was a good man, but he was in his 70s. Old guys in isolated places sometimes got spooked by shadows. I wish I'd listened. 3 days after Tom's visit, I got the radio call that started everything. Dr. Sarah Chen from the University of Alaska was leading a research team studying seal populations. They'd been out for 2 days, taking photographs and collecting samples. "Bartlett Base, this is research vessel Northern Light," came the scratchy voice through my radio. "We're seeing some unusual seal behavior out here. They're making sounds I've never heard before, almost like they're trying to talk." I keyed the microphone. "Northern Light, this is Ranger Kowalski. Can you describe these sounds more specifically?" Static filled the air for a long moment. Then, "Frank, you need to hear this. We're recording everything. These seals are making human words. I know how crazy that sounds, but I swear they're speaking English. Dr. Chen, are you sure you're not hearing things? Sound travels funny out here, especially with the ice formations. No, we're certain. Wait. There's something else. The water temperature just jumped 15 degrees in the last hour. The ice is melting in strange patterns around us. It looks almost like the radio went dead. I tried calling back every few minutes for the next hour. Nothing but static. By evening, I was worried enough to take my boat out to their last known position. The storm was getting worse, but I had good lights and knew these waters better than anyone. I found their boat just after midnight. The northern light was circling in a tight pattern, engine running, lights on. But there was nobody aboard. Coffee was still warm in the cups. Research notes were scattered across the table, held down by paperweights. Their equipment was still recording, cameras clicking photos of empty water every 30 seconds. The strangest thing was the logbook. Dr. Chen's handwriting filled the last entry. The seals are singing Martha's name. How do they know Martha's name? How do they know my wife's name? But Dr. Chen was a woman. She'd never been married to anyone named Martha. Martha was my wife's name. I searched the water with my spotlight but found nothing. The 3 researchers had simply vanished. I radioed for help, but the storm was interfering with transmission. All I could do was tow their empty boat back to shore and wait for morning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Martha's voice calling from outside my cabin. Soft and sweet, just like I remembered. "Frank, honey, come out here. I need to show you something." But Martha had been dead for 3 years. I grabbed my rifle and stepped onto the porch. The voice was coming from the water's edge, about 50 yards away. In the moonlight, I could see a figure standing knee-deep in the icy water. It looked like Martha. Same long, dark hair, same blue coat she'd worn on our last camping trip. "Frank, please. I've been waiting so long." My hands shook as I raised the rifle. I knew it wasn't really her, couldn't be, but the voice was perfect. Every word sounded exactly like my wife. "Who are you?" I called out. The figure tilted its head. When it spoke again, the voice was different. Dr. Chen's voice. "Frank, we need help. We're trapped down here, the water's so cold." I stepped closer, keeping the rifle ready. "Dr. Chen, where are the others?" "They're here too, down below. The seals brought us down to show us something amazing. But now we can't get back up. Please, Frank, come help us." Something was wrong with the way she stood. Too still, too straight, and her eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's. I backed toward my cabin. "I'll get the Coast Guard. They'll send divers." The thing wearing Dr. Chen's voice laughed. It was a sound like ice cracking. "There's no time, Frank. Come down now, or we'll die down here." I slammed my cabin door and barricaded it with furniture. The thing kept calling in different voices. Dr. Chen, her research assistants, and over again, Martha. It called until dawn, when it finally went quiet. When I checked the shoreline that morning, I found tracks in the mud. They started human-sized, but got bigger as they went toward the water. By the water's edge, they looked more like seal flippers, but with long claws. That's when I started believing in the old stories. The Coast Guard arrived 2 days later. They searched for a week but found no trace of the missing researchers. Officially, it went down as a drowning accident. 3 people lost in bad weather. Case closed. But I knew better, and whatever had taken them wasn't finished. The attacks on local wildlife got worse. Whole seal colonies would disappear overnight. The few survivors would beach themselves on the ice, refusing to go back in the water. Bears that came down to fish would retreat back into the forest after just a few minutes at the water's edge. My radio started picking up conversations at all hours, always in that strange Tlinet dialect I couldn't understand, but sometimes English words would slip through. Hungry, waiting, soon. 3 weeks after the researchers vanished, I got another visitor. Jake Morrison, a bush pilot who flew supplies to remote cabins, had engine trouble and needed to make an emergency landing on the lake near my station. Jake was a tough guy, flew in all kinds of weather. But when he climbed out of his plane, his face was white as snow. "Frank, there's something wrong out there," he said, pointing toward the deeper fjords. "I was flying over about an hour ago when I saw something in the water, something big. At first I thought it was a whale, but whales don't swim in formation like that." Formation? 3 of them, moving in a perfect triangle. And Frank, they were following my shadow on the water. When I turned, they turned. When I circled, they circled, like they were tracking me. Jake stayed the night while I helped him fix his engine. We were having dinner when we heard the singing. It started low, like whale song, but gradually got higher, more human. Jake dropped his fork and stared at me. "That's my daughter's voice," he whispered. I listened closer. Mixed in with Jake's daughter's voice, I could hear Martha singing the lullaby she used to hum when she was cooking dinner. And underneath both voices, something else. Dr. Chen and her team, all singing together in perfect harmony. "We need to go look," Jake said, standing up. I grabbed his arm. "No, that's what they want." "What who wants?" "Frank, what's going on here?" I told him everything, the missing researchers, the thing that had imitated Martha, the strange tracks. At first he looked at me like I was crazy, but then the singing got louder, and we could see lights moving under the ice through my window. "My God," Jake breathed. "What are they?" "Kushtaka," I said, remembering Tom's words. "The hungry ones." The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, we heard footsteps on my porch. Slow, deliberate steps that circled the cabin. Jake grabbed the poker from my fireplace. I took my rifle. A voice called through the door. Jake's daughter, clear as day. "Daddy? Daddy, I'm scared. There are monsters in the water. Please let me in." Jake started toward the door, but I blocked his path. "That's not her. She sounds so frightened." "Listen to her feet," I said. We both went quiet. The footsteps were too heavy, too slow, and they made a wet slapping sound like bare feet covered in water. "Daddy, please, it's so cold out here." Jake's face was streaming with tears, but he stayed back from the door. We waited in silence for an hour until the thing finally left. The next morning, we found huge handprints pressed into the ice around my cabin. The fingers were too long, and there were webs between them. Jake flew out that afternoon and never came back to this part of Alaska. Smart man. That same week, I found what I'd been dreading. Deep in an underwater cave system about 5 miles from my station, I discovered the bodies of Dr. Chen and her team. They were positioned around a stone table, sitting upright as if they were still alive. Their eyes were open, staring at nothing. But here's the thing that made my blood freeze. They looked like they'd been underwater for months, not weeks. Their skin was pale blue and covered in barnacles. Seaweed grew in their hair, and their mouths were full of sharp, pointed teeth that definitely hadn't been there when they were alive. They weren't dead. They were something else now, something in between. I swam back to the surface as fast as I could, but I felt them following me. When I looked down, I saw 3 shapes moving through the water below my boat. They were fast, faster than any human could swim. and they were getting bigger as they came closer to the surface. That night, they came for me in force. I woke up to find my cabin surrounded by dozens of creatures. Some looked like seals standing upright. Others looked almost human, but wrong, too tall, with skin that gleamed like it was always wet. They all had the same eyes, black and reflective like dark water. They didn't try to break in. Instead, they started calling to me in every voice I'd ever loved. Martha, my parents, my brother who died in Korea, even my old Navy buddies. Frank, come out and join us, they called. The water's warm down here. You'll never be lonely again. I barricaded the door and windows, but I knew they could break in if they wanted to. They were playing with me, testing me, seeing how long I could resist. By dawn, I understood the truth. The 3 researchers hadn't drowned. The Kushtaka had taken them, transformed them, made them part of their hunting pack. And now they wanted me too. I had to find a way to fight back, or I'd end up sitting at that underwater stone table with barnacles in my hair and shark teeth in my mouth. I knew I needed help, but the radio was dead, and the nearest settlement was 50 miles away. The Kushtaka were getting bolder every night. They'd figured out I wasn't going to come willingly, so they were going to take me by force. My only chance was to find Tom K.A. Hutt. He'd warned me about this. Maybe he knew how to fight them. I took my boat out at first light when the creatures seemed to rest. Tom's village was 20 miles down the coast, but I knew the way even in the growing darkness of the Arctic winter. I found Tom working on his nets outside his small house. When he saw me coming, he shook his head sadly. Too late now, Frank. They've marked you. Once the Kushtaka choose someone, they don't give up. There has to be something I can do, some way to fight them. Tom looked at me for a long moment. My grandfather fought them once, but it cost him everything. He led me into his house and showed me a bundle of dried plants hanging from the ceiling. Devil's Club, he said. The Kushtaka hate its smell. They can't stand to be near it when it burns. That's it? Just burn some plants? It's not that simple. You have to get them to come to you, all of them. Then you burn the Devil's Club and speak the old words. But Frank... Tom grabbed my shoulder. The old words call on spirits to help you. Those spirits demand a price. What kind of price? Something you love. Something precious. My grandfather saved his village, but his wife and children aged and died in a single night. The spirits took their years as payment. I thought about Martha, already 3 years in the ground. What did I have left to lose? Tom taught me the Tlingit words, made me practice until I got them right. He gave me enough Devil's Club to fill a small bag and wished me luck. Don't try to fight them in the water, he warned. Find a place where they have to come to you. I spent that day preparing. There was a sea cave about 2 miles from my cabin where the tide came in twice a day. Perfect place for a trap if I could get the timing right. The Kushtaka came at sunset, just like I expected, but this time I was ready. I met them at the shoreline with my rifle and the bag of Devil's Club. The 3 that had been Dr. Chen's research team were leading the pack, but they looked different now. Taller, more seal-like. Their skin was covered in scales, and their fingers ended in long black claws. "Hello, Frank," said the one that used to be Dr. Chen. Its voice was like grinding ice. "Ready to come with us?" "I've got a better idea," I said. "You want me? Come and take me." I ran toward the sea cave with all of them chasing me. They moved fast, sometimes running on 2 legs, sometimes dropping to all 4s like seals. Their calls echoed off the rocks, angry, hungry sounds that made my bones ache. The cave was narrow at the entrance but opened into a large chamber. perfect. I waited in the center with my back to the far wall. The tide was coming in, but I still had maybe 20 minutes before the water got too deep. They poured into the cave like a black wave, dozens of them. The 3 leaders approached slowly, savoring their victory. "Nowhere to run now," hissed the thing that had been Dr. Chen. "Time to join the family." That's when I lit the Devil's Club. The reaction was instant. They screamed and backed away from the smoke, but they couldn't retreat far. More Kushtaka were crowding in behind them. I started speaking Tom's words, my voice echoing off the cave walls. The ancient Tlingit syllables seemed to have power of their own. The water around my feet began to glow with a soft blue light. The Kushtaka writhed and clawed at their faces as if the smoke was burning them. But something was wrong. The words weren't working fast enough. The creatures were fighting through the pain, getting closer. The tide was rising rapidly now, already up to my knees. I needed to offer something precious to make the spirits help me. "Take my memories of Martha," I shouted in English. "Take every moment I had with her. Just stop these things." The blue light exploded outward. 2 of the Kushtaka caught fire and crumbled to ash. The rest fled, screaming, as the light chased them toward the cave entrance. But the one that had been Dr. Chen was stronger. It fought through the burning light and grabbed me with its claws. We fell together into the rising water. Under the surface, it showed me its true face, something between human and seal, with rows of needle teeth and eyes like black holes. It spoke without moving its mouth, the words appearing directly in my mind. "You've won this time, Ranger, but we are patient, we are eternal, and you've given up the only thing that made your life worth living. Was it worth it?" I drove my knife into its heart. Black blood clouded the water as it sank toward the bottom of the cave. When I surfaced, gasping and choking, the cave was empty except for the fading blue light and 2 piles of ash floating on the water. The price hit me immediately. I tried to remember Martha's face and couldn't. I tried to remember our wedding day, our first date, the sound of her laugh. Nothing. The spirits had taken it all. I made it back to shore just as the tide filled the cave completely. The surviving Kushtaka were gone, but I could feel them watching from somewhere out in the deep water. This wasn't over. It would never be over. The next morning, I radioed for an emergency transfer, told them I was having medical problems and needed to be stationed inland. They approved it without question, probably figured the isolation was getting to me. Tom helped me pack my things. He could see the change in me, the emptiness where my memories of Martha used to be. "The spirits kept their bargain," he said quietly, "but they always take more than you expect to give. At least other people are safe. For now. But Frank, these things don't die easy. You hurt them bad, but one got away. It'll heal, it'll get stronger, and it'll remember you." I've been stationed in Fairbanks for 2 years now. Desk job mostly. Filing reports, training new rangers, safe work far from the water. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear the radio picking up strange signals, voices speaking in that same Tlingit dialect, and sometimes mixed in with the foreign words, I hear English. Frank. We remember Frank. Frank by the water. Frank who burns. Frank who owes us. Last month, a young ranger named Peterson was assigned to Glacier Bay. Eager kid, full of enthusiasm about working in the wilderness. I tried to warn him about the old stories, told him to respect what the Tlingit people say about those waters. He laughed and said the same thing I used to say. "Come on, Kowalski, you don't actually believe in that stuff, do you?" Yesterday I got word that Peterson's been reporting strange seal behavior. Says they're making sounds almost like human voices. His last radio check mentioned unusual water temperature readings and ice formations that look almost deliberate. I've put in for emergency leave. I'm driving up there tonight. I can't remember Martha's face anymore. Can't recall the sound of her voice or the warmth of her touch. The spirits took all of that. But I still remember my duty as a ranger. Still remember that it's my job to protect people in these wild places. The Kushtaka are still out there, still hunting. And until they're all gone, no one who ventures into those dark waters is safe. The old stories are true. The hungry ones wake when the ice comes, and they're always, always hunting. My name is Maria Vasquez, and I've been a park ranger at Denali for 9 years now. People always ask me what it's like being the only woman doing this job up here in Alaska. The truth is, most days I forget about it completely. When you're dealing with a grizzly bear or pulling someone off a mountain, nobody cares what's between your legs. They just want someone who knows what they're doing. That January morning started like any other. The thermometer outside our little station at Wonder Lake read 40 below zero. The kind of cold that makes your nose hairs freeze the second you step outside. I was checking the radio equipment when the call came in. Wonder Lake Station, this is base camp. We've got a problem. I picked up the radio. This is Ranger Vasquez. What's going on? Lost climbing party. 5 experienced climbers went radio silent 3 days ago. Last known position was their 14,000-foot camp on the south face. My stomach dropped. 3 days in this weather meant they were probably already dead. But we had to try. That's what we do up here. I'll head out this morning, I said. Negative, Vasquez. Storm's coming in. Wait for backup. I looked out the window at the clear morning sky. Sure, clouds were building on the horizon, but I'd been reading this mountain's moods for almost a decade. I had maybe 6 hours before things got nasty. I'm going, I told them. These people don't have time to wait. My 2 station partners, Rangers Tom and Jake, were already shaking their heads before I finished talking. Tom was older, maybe 50, with a gray beard that always smelled like coffee and cigarettes. Jake was younger but acted like he'd been here forever. Maria, be smart about this, Tom said. You can't save dead people. We don't know they're dead yet. In this cold, after 3 days? Jake laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Come on. I started packing my gear anyway. Medical supplies, rope, ice axe, emergency beacon, the works. I'd been a medic in the Army before this job, and old habits die hard. Always be ready for the worst. The Inuit guide they hired came back yesterday, Tom said quietly. Alone. Wouldn't say what happened. Just kept talking about hungry children. I stopped packing for a second. The local Inuit guides were tough as nails. I'd never seen one abandon a job before. What did he mean by that? Hell if I know. Probably just scared. You know how they get about this mountain? I did know. The older Inuit folks had stories about Denali that went back hundreds of years. Most of them weren't the kind you'd tell around a campfire, but stories don't kill people. The cold does. The mountain does. Not fairy tales. I strapped on my snowshoes and headed for the door. The morning air hit my face like a slap, but it felt good, clean, real. Up here, you always knew where you stood. The mountain didn't lie to you or pretend to be something it wasn't. It just was. The first few miles were routine. I'd hiked this route dozens of times before. The snow crunched under my shoes with that particular sound it only makes when it's really, really cold. Everything was white and silent except for my breathing and the distant whisper of wind over the peaks. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Then I realized what it was. No tracks. In 9 years of working this mountain, I'd never seen the snow so empty. No rabbit prints, no ptarmigan scratches, nothing. Even in the worst weather, something was always moving out here. But today, it was like every living thing had packed up and left. I checked my compass and kept walking. The missing climbers had been experienced. Their last radio check mentioned setting up camp near the old avalanche zone. If they were smart, they'd have built a snow cave for shelter. If I was lucky, they were still alive in it. The clouds were moving in faster than I'd expected. The wind picked up too, making that low howling sound that could drive you crazy if you listened to it too long. But there was something else mixed in with it. Something that almost sounded like... I stopped walking and listened hard. Nothing, just wind. But for a second there, I could have sworn I heard voices. The climbing party's base camp was a mess. I found it around noon, just as the storm clouds started blocking out what little sun we got this time of year. 3 tents were scattered around a flat area near some big rocks, but they looked wrong. The orange fabric was shredded, not torn by wind, but ripped apart. Long, clean cuts that went from the inside out. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" My voice echoed off the rocks and died. I unclipped my radio. "Base camp, this is Vasquez. I found their first site. No sign of the climbers, but something's not right here." Static crackled back at me. The storm was already messing with our signals. I walked around the destroyed camp, trying to piece together what had happened. The climbers' gear was scattered everywhere. Sleeping bags, cooking equipment, even a few protein bars frozen solid in the snow. But here's what bothered me most. Their packs were gone. All of them. If something had attacked them here, why would they grab their packs? And where were the bodies? I knelt down to examine the snow more closely. Footprints led away from the camp toward the higher peaks. But they looked strange. Some were clearly made by hiking boots, but others were different. Bigger, with what looked like claw marks at the front. "Wolf prints," I muttered to myself. But that didn't make sense either. Wolves don't usually attack groups of people, especially not 5 adults with gear and noise. And these prints were huge, bigger than any wolf I'd seen in Alaska. I followed the trail for maybe 100 yards. The boot prints and wolf prints ran side by side for a while, then something weird happened. The wolf prints just stopped. But there were more boot prints, like someone else had joined the group. I studied the tracks carefully. The new boot prints were different from the others. Older style, maybe. And deeper, like whoever was wearing them was really heavy. The wind was getting stronger now, and snow was starting to fall. I needed to move fast if I wanted to find these people before the storm hit full force. I followed the trail higher up the mountain. About a mile from the base camp, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was Steve Morrison's jacket. I recognized it because he'd been wearing the same bright red parka every time he'd checked in at our station over the past week. But the jacket wasn't just lying there in the snow. It was hanging from a tree branch, about 10 feet off the ground. There were no trees that tall anywhere near here. I looked up and saw it was actually hanging from an old, dead pine that was growing out of a crack in the rock face. But how the hell had it gotten up there? Even with climbing gear, it would have been a weird place to stash clothing, unless someone had thrown it. I tried my radio again. Nothing but static. The storm was really moving in now, and I knew I should head back. But something made me keep going. Maybe it was my military training, or maybe I was just too stubborn to quit. Either way, I followed that trail deeper into the mountain. That's when I heard it again. Voices in the wind. This time I was sure. They were faint, but they were definitely human. Or at least, they sounded human. Men's voices calling out words I couldn't quite make out. "Hello," I yelled back. "Can you hear me?" The voices stopped immediately. I waited, listening hard. Nothing but wind and snow. But then, just as I was about to give up, I heard something else. Something that made the hair on my neck stand up. Howling. But not like any wolf I'd ever heard. This was different, deeper. And it had a rhythm to it, like a song. The sound came from up ahead, somewhere in the rocks where the trail disappeared. I checked my watch. 2 in the afternoon, but it felt like night was already coming. The storm was bringing darkness with it. I should have turned back right then. Every instinct I'd developed in 9 years of mountain rescue was telling me to get out of there. But those voices, what if the climbers were still alive? What if they needed help? I pushed forward into the storm. The trail wound through a narrow gap between 2 huge boulders. On the other side was a small valley I'd never seen before, which was weird because I thought I knew every inch of this mountain. The snow was deeper here, and the wind had carved it into strange shapes that looked almost like sculptures. That's when I saw the second camp. This one was different, organized. The tents were set up in a perfect circle around a fire pit, and there was no damage at all. Smoke was even rising from the center. "Hello," I called out again. "This is Park Ranger Maria Vasquez." A tent flap opened, and a man stepped out. I recognized him immediately. Dave Chen, the expedition leader. But something was wrong with the way he moved. Too stiff, too slow. "Dave?" I walked toward him. "Are you okay? We've been looking for you." He turned toward me, and I got my first good look at his face. His eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils. The whole eye, white and all, was black as coal. And when he smiled at me, I saw that his teeth were too sharp. "We've been waiting for you," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his voice at all. That's when I ran. I crashed through the snow like my life depended on it, which I was pretty sure it did. Behind me, I could hear them coming. Not just Dave, but others too. Footsteps that were too fast and too quiet for people wearing heavy boots in deep snow. I made it back through the gap between the boulders and kept running down the trail toward the base camp. My lungs burned in the cold air, and my snowshoes kept catching on rocks hidden under the snow. But I didn't dare slow down. The howling started again, but this time it was all around me, coming from the rocks above, from the trees on both sides of the trail, even from behind. It was like being surrounded by a pack of wolves, except these wolves could coordinate their calls like a choir. I reached for my radio as I ran. Base camp, this is Vasquez, emergency." Nothing but static. I stumbled and went down hard, rolling in the snow before I could stop myself. When I looked back up the trail, I saw them. There were 5 figures coming down the slope toward me, moving in a line like soldiers. But they weren't walking normally. They were moving on all 4s, fast and low to the ground. But every few steps they'd rear up and run on 2 legs like people. In the growing darkness of the storm, I couldn't make out their faces clearly, but I could see their shapes, and they were wrong. Too long in some places, too thick in others. And their arms hung down almost to the ground. I got back to my feet and kept running. The trail down to the base camp felt like it went on forever. My legs were shaking from exhaustion and fear. and the storm was getting so bad I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. But I could hear them back there, getting closer. That awful howling was right behind me now. When I finally reached the destroyed base camp, I made a desperate choice. Instead of continuing down the mountain, I ducked behind the largest boulder and tried to hide. My breathing sounded impossibly loud in my own ears. I was sure they'd hear it and find me immediately. I fumbled with my radio one more time. "Mayday, Mayday," I whispered into it. "This is Ranger Vasquez. I'm at the climbing party's base camp. I need immediate backup. The missing climbers. They're not right." Static answered me. The howling stopped. Everything went quiet except for the wind and snow. I waited, hardly daring to breathe. Maybe they'd lost my trail in the storm. Maybe they'd given up. Then I heard Dave's voice, crystal clear in the darkness. "Maria, we know you're here." I pressed myself harder against the rock. How did he know my name? I'd told him, but that wasn't Dave anymore. Whatever was wearing his face wasn't human. "We don't want to hurt you," another voice called out. A woman's voice this time. Lisa, probably, the only female climber in their group. "We just want to talk." Like hell they did. I heard footsteps in the snow, slow and deliberate. They were searching for me, moving in a pattern. Smart, organized. Not like animals at all, but not like people either. "We found something up here, Maria," Dave's voice continued. "Something wonderful. We want to share it with you." I closed my eyes and tried to think. I was maybe 2 miles from the station. In good weather, I could make it in an hour. But in this storm, with things hunting me, I'd be lucky to make it at all. A new sound made me open my eyes, scraping like claws on rock. I looked up and saw a shape moving on top of the boulder I was hiding behind. It was definitely human-sized, but it was crawling like an animal. As I watched, it stopped and lifted its head. Even in the darkness, I could see its profile. The face was human, but stretched out wrong. The jaw stuck out too far, and the ears were pointed like a dog's. It was sniffing the air. I held my breath and didn't move a muscle. After what felt like forever, it moved on, crawling across the rocks like a spider. When I was sure it was gone, I started moving again. Not down the trail this time, but cross-country. It would be harder, but maybe I could lose them in the storm. I made it about half a mile before they found me again. The first one came out of nowhere, dropping from a tree right in front of me. Up close in the beam of my flashlight, I got a good look at what Dave Chen had become. His face was still mostly human, but his mouth was full of sharp teeth like a wolf's. His hands had grown long claws, and his legs were bent backward at the knees. He was covered in fur that looked like it had grown right through his climbing clothes. But the worst part was his eyes. Those black, empty eyes that looked right through me like I was already dead. "Hello, Maria," he said in that wrong voice. "Time to join the pack." I swung my ice axe at his head as hard as I could. The blade caught him in the shoulder and he screamed. Not like a person screams, but like an animal. He fell back into the snow, black blood pouring from the wound. I didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. I ran. The others were howling again, but it sounded different now. Angry. Hungry. I crashed through the trees. Branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear them coming fast. All of them this time, and they weren't being quiet anymore. Through the storm, I caught a glimpse of light ahead. The ranger station. I was almost home. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The lights were on, but there were too many of them. And they were moving, I slowed down and approached carefully. Through the windows, I could see figures inside. Tom and Jake, my station partners. But they were just standing there, not moving, like mannequins. And there were others with them, shapes I didn't recognize. That's when I understood. Whatever had happened to the climbing party, it was spreading. The things that used to be Dave and Lisa and the others had made it to my station first. They were waiting for me. I was trapped between the pack behind me and whatever was waiting ahead. The storm was getting worse by the minute, and I was already exhausted from running. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. I circled around the station, staying low and quiet. Through the back window, I could see Tom sitting at our radio desk. He wasn't moving at all, just staring straight ahead with those same black eyes I'd seen on Dave. Jake was standing by the door like a guard. His head kept turning back and forth, scanning the darkness outside. Hunting. But there was someone else there too. An old Inuit woman I'd never seen before. She was sitting in our kitchen area, and she was the only one who looked normal. Her eyes were her own, and she kept looking around like she was scared. A survivor, maybe. Someone who'd gotten caught here when whatever this was started spreading. I made my way to the back door as quietly as I could. The key was hidden under a fake rock we kept for emergencies. My fingers were so numb from cold I could barely work the lock, but I finally got it open. The woman looked up when I stepped inside. Her eyes went wide with fear, and she started to stand. "Shh," I whispered, putting my finger to my lips. Tom and Jake didn't react at all. They just kept staring and standing like they were frozen. I motioned for the woman to follow me, and we crept toward the storage room in the back. Once we were inside with the door closed, I finally felt safe enough to talk. "What happened here?" I whispered. She was old, maybe 70, with long gray hair and traditional clothing. When she spoke, her English was accented but clear. "The Adlet," she said. "They came with your friends, changed them." Adlet? Wolf people. My grandmother's grandmother told stories. Children of the ice. They hunt in packs, change others to be like them. I thought about what I'd seen. Dave and the others, moving like animals but thinking like people. The coordination, the intelligence. How do we stop them? She shook her head. You don't stop them. You survive them. Or you join them. There has to be a way. Maybe. The stories say they keep some human feelings. Love, loyalty, pain. If you can reach that part. A howl outside cut her off. They'd found my trail. "They're coming," I said. The old woman nodded. "I am Anna Tutu. My grandson was your guide. He tried to warn your friends, but they wouldn't listen." "Is he alive?" "No, he fought them. They killed him for it." The front door creaked open. I heard Jake's voice, but it sounded different now, deeper. "Maria, we know you're here. Tom found your tracks." I looked around the storage room for anything I could use as a weapon. Rope, medical supplies, a flare gun. Not much, but it would have to do. "Anna, do you know another way out of here?" "The window, but they will be watching." "Then we fight." I grabbed the flare gun and loaded it with a bright red emergency flare. If these things still had human parts, maybe bright light would hurt them like it hurt animals. The storage room door handle turned slowly. "Maria," Tom's voice now, but wrong like the others. "Come out, we want to help you." I raised the flare gun and fired it right through the door. The flare burst through the wood in a shower of sparks and red light. Tom screamed and stumbled backward, clawing at his face. The other shapes scattered away from the brightness. "Now!" I yelled to Anna. We burst out of the storage room. The main room of the station was full of smoke and red light from the flare. I could see Tom rolling on the floor, his face burned. Jake was pressed against the wall, covering his eyes. But there were others too. The things that used to be the climbing party were crowded into our little station, all of them backing away from the light. Anna and I ran for the front door, but Dave blocked our way. His burned shoulder was already healing, the black blood stopping its flow. He smiled at me with those sharp teeth. "You hurt me, Maria. Now I'm going to hurt you back." "Wait," Anna said, stepping between us. "Look at me." Dave turned his black eyes toward her. "Old woman, you will join us too." "I know what you used to be," Anna said calmly. "I know you were human once. I know you remember love." Something flickered in Dave's face. Just for a second, his eyes weren't completely black. "I remember," he said quietly, "but it hurts too much. Being like this is easier." "It doesn't have to be," Anna told him. "You can choose." "No." His voice got hard again. "We choose for everyone now." But in that moment of distraction, I saw my chance. I tackled Dave around the waist, and we both went crashing through the front door into the snow outside. The cold air hit the burns on his face, and he screamed again. I rolled away from him and got to my feet. "Anna, run!" But when I turned around, she was standing in the doorway facing the others. All of them. They'd crowded around her, but they weren't attacking. "I'm too old to run," she said to me, "and too tired to be afraid. Go, find help, tell people what happened here. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Someone needs to remember this. Someone needs to warn others." Dave was getting up behind me, his claws extended. The others were moving out of the station now, surrounding us in the snow. Anna began singing. It was a low, sad song in a language I didn't recognize. Inuit, probably. A death song. The adlets stopped moving. They all turned toward her, listening. And in that moment, I saw something impossible. Tears in their black eyes. All of them, even Dave, were crying. "Run," Anna whispered to me. I ran. I made it back to the main road just as the search and rescue team was heading up to look for me. They found me stumbling through the snow, half frozen and talking about wolf people and shapeshifters. They thought I was hallucinating from hypothermia. The official report called it an avalanche. 5 missing climbers, 2 rangers, and 1 elderly Inuit woman presumed dead. Equipment failure and severe weather cited as contributing factors. The station was listed as destroyed by the storm. But I knew better. They offered me psychological counseling, early retirement with full benefits, a nice, quiet transfer to a park somewhere warm where people don't disappear and wild animals stay wild. I took the counseling, but not the retirement. And I definitely didn't transfer. Instead, I learned to speak Inuit. I studied the old stories, the ones the elders tell about the hungry children of the ice. I started working with the tribal councils, making sure their voices were heard in park planning meetings. Because Anna was right about one thing: someone needed to remember. 3 months after that night, a group of college kids went missing on the north face of Denali. They found their campsite destroyed, gear scattered, no bodies. The search team said it looked like a bear attack, but I know what bear attacks look like. And I know what adlet attacks look like too. The thing about legends is that they don't die just because people stop believing in them. They wait in the cold places, the empty places, the places where humans don't usually go. And sometimes, when people wander into those places unprepared, the legends remember how to hunt. I still work at Denali. Different station now, closer to the main road. But I listen to the radio chatter from the backcountry patrols. I watch for the patterns. Missing people, destroyed campsites, reports of unusual wolf activity. Because somewhere up in that frozen wilderness, a pack is still hunting, still growing, still waiting for the next group of climbers who think they know everything about surviving in the wild. The Adlet are patient. They've been patient for hundreds of years. But they're also hungry. And hunger, as Anna told me in those final moments, never really goes away. Sometimes on clear winter nights, when the aurora lights up the sky, I think I can hear them howling. Not like wolves, but like people who remember what it felt like to be human. That might be the saddest sound in the world, or the most dangerous. I'm still trying to decide. My name is Robert Fairbanks, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in September 1983, deep in gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska. I wish I could say it was just a bad dream, but the scars on my arms and the nightmares that still wake me up prove otherwise. At 38, I thought I knew everything about surviving in the wilderness. I grew up in Anchorage, the son of an Inupiat mother and a white father who worked the oil fields. For most of my life, I turned my back on my native heritage. I wanted to be modern, civilized. I spoke English, not Inupiaq. I wore regular clothes, not traditional parkas. I ate hamburgers, not seal meat. But as I got older, something inside me started calling me back to the old ways. That's why I was up in the Arrowgetch Peaks region that fall, working with a small team of archaeologists from the University of Alaska. They were studying ancient Inupiat hunting sites, and I was their guide and protector. The area we were working in was unlike anywhere else on Earth. Imagine mountains that rise straight up from the ground like giant stone fingers, reaching toward a sky that stays dark for 14 hours a day. No roads lead there. No trails either. Just endless tundra, rivers you have to ford on foot, and silence so complete it makes your ears ring. Dr. Sarah Chen led the archaeology team. She was a small woman with thick glasses who got excited about every broken piece of pottery or old spear point we found. Her assistant, Mike Torres, was fresh out of graduate school and treated the whole trip like an adventure. Then there was Dr. James Whitman, an older man who specialized in Arctic cultures. He knew more about Inupiat history than most Inupiat people. Our camp sat in a valley between two massive peaks. We had 3 small tents, a camp stove, and enough supplies for 2 weeks. Every morning, we'd spread out across the valley, looking for signs of ancient settlements. Every evening, we'd return to catalog what we'd found. I should have paid more attention to the warnings. The first sign came from the caribou. Every fall, huge herds migrate through this area, following paths their ancestors used for thousands of years. But this year, something was different. The caribou changed their route. Instead of coming through our valley like they always had, they went miles out of their way to avoid it. Strange, Dr. Whitman said, watching through binoculars as the herd passed far to our east. The migration patterns here haven't changed in centuries. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold September air. My mother used to tell stories about animals avoiding certain places. She said they could sense things humans couldn't. The second sign came 3 days later. We'd been finding artifacts everywhere. Stone tools, pottery pieces, old fire pits. But then Mike found something that made Dr. Chen drop her clipboard. It was a burial site, not just one grave, but dozens of them. And they were old, really old. Some of the bones had spear points still stuck in them, and not the kind used for hunting animals. These were war spears, made for killing people. "This is incredible," Dr. Chen whispered, kneeling beside one of the graves. These people died violently. This might be evidence of a battle between different tribal groups. But Dr. Whitman looked troubled. He'd been studying the bones for an hour, taking notes and measurements. Finally, he pulled me aside. "Robert," he said quietly, "some of these injuries, they don't make sense. Look at this skull." He showed me a human skull with deep gouges in it. The marks were too big and too deep to be made by any weapon I knew. They looked like they'd been made by claws. Really big claws. "Could be bear claws," I said, but even as I spoke, I didn't believe it. No bear had claws that size. That night, as we sat around our small camp stove eating dinner, Dr. Chen couldn't stop talking about the find. "We need to extend our stay," she said. "This site could rewrite what we know about pre-contact warfare in the Arctic." I wanted to tell her we should leave. I wanted to explain that my people had reasons for avoiding certain places, that not everything could be explained by science. But I was trying to be modern, civilized, so I kept my mouth shut. I shouldn't have. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Mike screaming. I unzipped my tent and stumbled outside, still half asleep. Mike was standing about 50 yards from camp, pointing at something in the ground. Dr. Chen and Dr. Whitman were already running toward him. When I got there, I understood why he was screaming. Tracks. Huge tracks. They looked like bear paws, but they were twice the size of any grizzly bear I'd ever seen. Each print was nearly 2 feet long and sunk deep into the permafrost. They formed a line that went right through the middle of our camp, passing within inches of our tents. "Jesus Christ," Dr. Whitman whispered. "What kind of bear makes tracks like that?" I knelt beside one of the prints, my heart pounding. The track was so fresh I could see individual claw marks in the dirt. But here's what really scared me. The prints showed the animal walking on its hind legs. For at least 30 yards, these tracks showed a creature walking upright like a person. Bears can stand on their hind legs, but they don't walk that way. Not for 30 yards. "We need to call this in," Dr. Chen said. "The Park Service needs to know there's a dangerous animal in the area." I tried the radio, but all I got was static. Same with our emergency satellite phone. It was like something was jamming our signals. "Probably just atmospheric interference," Mike said, but he didn't sound convinced. We spent that day working the burial site, but everyone was on edge. I kept my rifle close and found myself looking over my shoulder every few minutes. The mountains around us suddenly felt less like protection and more like walls closing in. That afternoon, Mike made another discovery. This one was different from the others. He found it at the center of the burial site, a grave that was larger and deeper than the rest. Inside was the skeleton of a tall man, wearing what remained of traditional Inupiat clothing. But unlike the other graves, this one hadn't been disturbed by animals or weather. It was perfectly preserved. Around the skeleton's neck was a carved ivory amulet shaped like a bear. The moment Mike lifted the amulet from the grave, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. I'm not exaggerating. 1 second we were working in normal September weather, and the next we were all pulling on our jackets. "Weird weather pattern," Dr. Chen said, but I could see she was shaken. Dr. Whitman was studying the amulet with a magnifying glass. "The craftsmanship is incredible," he said. "This might be some kind of shaman's burial. The bear figure could represent a spiritual guardian or—" He stopped talking. He was staring at the amulet with a strange expression on his face. "What is it?" I asked. He handed me the magnifying glass. "Look at the bear's eyes." I looked. The tiny carved bear had eyes made of some kind of stone that seemed to glow with their own light. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that the eyes seemed to be looking at me. Actually looking at me. "It's just polished stone," Mike said, but his voice was shaky. "Some kind of mineral that reflects light." That night, none of us slept well. Every sound outside our tents, every whisper of wind, every settling of the camp equipment made us jump. I lay in my sleeping bag with my rifle beside me, listening to the darkness. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it. A sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It was like a roar, but deeper than any animal sound I'd ever heard. It came from somewhere above us, echoing off the mountain walls. The sound went on for nearly a minute, rising and falling like a song. I unzipped my tent and looked outside. The other tents were silent, but I could tell from the way they were moving that everyone was awake and listening. The roar came again, closer this time, and with it came a smell, musky and wild, like wet fur and old bones. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the valley. The beam caught something moving between the shadows at the far end of camp. Something big, something that walked on 2 legs. When the light hit it, it stopped moving and turned toward me. For just a second, I saw eyes reflecting the light. Yellow eyes, glowing like the carved bear's eyes on the amulet. Then it was gone. I kept the flashlight beam moving, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. But I could still smell that wild scent in the air, and I could feel something watching us from the darkness. In the morning, we found more tracks. These ones circled our entire camp, as if whatever made them had been studying us, learning about us. Mike wanted to pack up and leave immediately. "This is getting too dangerous," he said. "We're dealing with some kind of mutant bear or something." But Dr. Chen refused to go. "We're on the verge of a major discovery," she insisted. "We can't abandon the site now." Dr. Whitman agreed with her. "We'll take precautions," he said. "Post a watch at night. Keep the fire burning. We'll be fine." I should have forced them to leave. I was the guide, the one responsible for everyone's safety. But I was curious too. My Inupiat blood was stirring, remembering old stories my grandmother used to tell. Stories about spirits that protected sacred places. Stories about creatures that were more than animals. I wanted to know if those stories were true. I should have been more careful about what I wished for. The 3rd night, our equipment started failing. It began with small things. Mike's camera stopped working, even though the batteries were fresh. Dr. Chen's laptop shut down and wouldn't restart. The camp stove flickered and died, leaving us to eat cold food in the dark. "It's the cold," Dr. Whitman said, trying to convince himself as much as us. "Electronic equipment fails in extreme temperatures." But it wasn't that cold, and our thermometer had stopped working too. We were sitting around our flashlights, playing cards and trying not to think about the darkness pressing in around us, when we heard voices. They were speaking Inupiaq, my mother's language. I could make out some of the words. Warnings about disturbing the dead. Please to leave the sacred place alone. "Do you guys hear that?" Mike whispered. We all heard it. Voices coming from the burial site, clear as if people were standing right there talking to each other. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and started walking toward the sound. The others followed close behind me. The voices got louder as we approached the burial site. I could see our excavation tools scattered around the graves, exactly where we'd left them, but there was no one there. "It's the wind," Dr. Chen said, but her voice was shaking. "Sound carries strangely in the mountains." Then the wind stopped completely. The air went perfectly still, and the voices kept talking. They were coming from underground, from the graves themselves. Mike broke first. He turned and ran back toward camp, stumbling over rocks in the darkness. The rest of us followed, our flashlight beams dancing wildly as we ran. Back at camp, we huddled together in Dr. Chen's tent, the largest one. Nobody wanted to be alone. "There has to be a rational explanation," Dr. Whitman said, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I finally told them what I should have said from the beginning. "This place is forbidden," I said. "My grandmother used to tell stories about it. She called it the Tornarsuk's domain, the Spirit Bear's territory." "Spirit Bear?" Dr. Chen asked. "A guardian. Something that protects sacred hunting grounds. She said it was as big as a truck and could walk like a man. She said it could control the weather and speak to the dead." "That's just folklore," Dr. Whitman said, but he didn't sound convinced anymore. "Is it?" I asked. "Look around you. Look at what's happening." We stayed awake the rest of that night, taking turns on watch. Nothing else happened, but none of us felt safe. The next day, Dr. Whitman made a discovery that changed everything. He'd been studying his notes from the burial site, comparing them with historical records. What he found made his face go white. "Robert," he said, pulling me aside, "I know what happened here." He showed me his notebook, filled with dates and tribal names. "This isn't just any burial site," he said. "These are the graves of warriors who died defending this valley from Russian fur traders in 1847. According to the records, the Russians were trying to establish a hunting post here, but the local Inupiat drove them off. So the records also say that after the battle, the Russians reported being attacked by a giant bear that killed 12 men. They described it as larger than any natural animal and said it fought like a demon." My blood went cold. The Tornarsuk. "If the stories are true," Dr. Whitman said, "then we've been digging up the graves of warriors who died protecting this place, and we've disturbed the burial of their spiritual guardian." That afternoon, while we were working, Mike found something that proved Dr. Whitman was right. Buried beneath the shaman's grave was a second layer of bones. These weren't Inupiat bones. They were European. 12 skeletons wearing the remains of Russian military uniforms. Each skeleton had been torn apart by massive claws. "We need to rebury everything," I said, "right now." But it was too late. As we worked to put the bones back in their graves, the temperature started dropping again. But this time, it didn't stop at 10 degrees. It kept falling. Within an hour, our breath was coming out in clouds. Ice began forming on the ground around the burial site, even though the sun was still shining. That's when we saw it. It came walking out of the mountains like something from a nightmare. At first, it looked like a huge brown bear walking on its hind legs. But as it got closer, I could see it wasn't entirely solid. I could see through parts of it, like looking through thick ice. It was 20 feet tall, with claws like swords and yellow eyes that burned like fire. It moved with the smooth grace of a hunter, and with each step, the ice spread further around its feet. Mike screamed and ran. Dr. Chen dropped her excavation tools and stood frozen. Dr. Whitman fell to his knees. The creature, the Tornarsuk, looked at each of us, in turn. When its eyes met mine, I felt something reaching into my mind, searching through my memories. I saw flashes of the past. Inupiat warriors defending their sacred hunting grounds. Russian soldiers shooting and burning. The great spirit bear rising from the earth to protect its people. The creature spoke, and its voice was the sound of wind through ice caves. "You have disturbed the sleep of the dead," it said in perfect Inupiaq. "You have brought strangers to sacred ground. You have forgotten the old ways. Then it looked directly at me. But you are blood of the people. You can choose. Before I could ask what choice it meant, the Tornarsuk turned and walked toward where Mike was running. It moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. Mike's scream cut off suddenly. When I found him an hour later, he was frozen solid, his face locked in an expression of absolute terror. There wasn't a mark on him, but the ice around his body was 3 inches thick. That night, as we huddled around our failing flashlight, I knew we were all going to die unless I did something. The Tornarsuk was just getting started. The next morning, Dr. Chen was gone. I found her tent empty, her sleeping bag still warm. Her footprints led toward the burial site, but they stopped after about 20 yards, as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. Dr. Whitman and I searched the entire valley, calling her name until our voices were hoarse. We found nothing except more of those massive tracks, circling the camp like a predator studying its prey. It took her, Dr. Whitman whispered. The thing took Sarah. I nodded. There was no point pretending anymore that we were dealing with a natural animal. That afternoon, I did something I should have done days earlier. I walked to the highest point in the valley and began to pray. Not the Christian prayers I'd learned in school, but the old prayers my grandmother had taught me when I was small. I spoke in Inupiaq, asking for guidance from my ancestors. The answer came in the form of an old man. He appeared without warning, walking across the tundra as if he'd been traveling for days. He was Inupiat, dressed in traditional clothing, with a face so lined with wrinkles it looked like a map of the Arctic. "Grandfather," I said, using the respectful term for an elder. He nodded. "You have awakened the Tornarsuk," he said in Inupiaq. "Your friends are dead because they would not listen." "How do you know?" "I felt it stirring when you disturbed the graves. I came as fast as I could, but I am old, and the journey is long." He looked around the valley with sad eyes. "This place has been protected for over a century. The warriors buried here died defending it from those who would take what was not theirs. The Tornarsuk bound itself to their spirits, promising to guard this ground forever. How do I stop it?" The old man shook his head. "You cannot stop it. You can only appease it. But the price is high." He reached into his pack and pulled out a bundle wrapped in seal skin. Inside were traditional offerings, carved ivory, sacred stones, and a whaling harpoon that looked ancient. "These belonged to the shaman whose grave you opened," the elder said. "They must be returned to him. But more than that, you must take his place as guardian of this valley." "What does that mean?" "It means you stay here, forever. It means you watch over the sacred graves and make sure no one disturbs them again. It means you become part of the Tornarsuk's protection." I stared at him. "I'll die out here alone. Perhaps, or perhaps you will find a different kind of life. The choice is yours. Serve as guardian, or watch the spirit bear hunt down everyone who knows of this place." That night, as Dr. Whitman and I sat in our tent listening to the wind howl outside, I told him what the elder had said. "That's insane," he whispered. "We'll radio for help. The Park Service will send a helicopter." "With what radio? And even if they come, what then? The Tornarsuk won't stop hunting until everyone who disturbed this place is dead." "You're talking about folklore, Robert. Superstition." "Then explain Mike's body. Explain the tracks. Explain where Dr. Chen went." He couldn't answer. Around midnight, we heard Dr. Chen screaming. The sound came from somewhere outside the camp, echoing off the mountain walls. She was calling our names, begging for help. "Sarah!" Dr. Whitman shouted, scrambling for the tent zipper. I grabbed his arm. That's not her. What do you mean? She's alive. She needs our help. Listen to her voice. Really listen. Dr. Whitman stopped struggling and listened. The screaming continued, but now he could hear what I heard. The voice was wrong. It had Dr. Chen's words, but the tone was too deep, too hollow, like an echo of her voice coming from a great distance. It's mimicking her, I said, trying to draw us out. The false screaming continued for an hour, moving around the camp in a circle. Sometimes it sounded like Dr. Chen, sometimes like Mike. Once I heard my own voice calling for help from outside. Dr. Whitman broke before dawn. I can't take this anymore, he said, grabbing his flashlight and jacket. I'm going to find her. I tried to stop him, but he was a big man and desperate. He shoved me aside and ran out into the darkness. I heard him calling Dr. Chen's name as he stumbled through the rocks. Then I heard something else answering him in her voice, drawing him further from camp. His screams started a few minutes later and lasted until the sun came up. I found what was left of him at the burial site. He was kneeling beside the shaman's grave, frozen solid like Mike had been. But unlike Mike, Dr. Whitman's eyes were gone. In their place were 2 holes filled with ice. I was alone now, just me and the Tornarsuk. As the sun set that evening, it came for me. I saw it approaching from across the valley, walking upright like a man but towering above the landscape. As it got closer, I could see it more clearly than ever before. It wasn't entirely a bear. Parts of it looked almost human, the way it held its massive arms, the intelligence in those burning yellow eyes. It was like looking at the spirit of every warrior who had ever died protecting something sacred. It stopped 20 feet away and spoke. "You are the last," it said in English this time. "Will you run like the others? Will you deny what you know to be true?" I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to flee. "I know what you are. I know why you're here." "Do you? Then you know what must be done." I nodded and walked to my backpack. Inside, I had the bundle the old man had given me. I pulled out the carved ivory amulet, the same one Mike had taken from the shaman's grave. "This belongs to him," I said, holding it up. The Tornarsuk's eyes blazed brighter. "Return it then. Take your place as guardian, or join your friends in the ice." I walked to the shaman's grave and knelt beside it. As I placed the amulet on the bones, I felt something change inside me. It was like a door opening in my mind, letting in knowledge that had been waiting there my whole life. I understood the old stories now. I understood why my people had always avoided this place. I understood what it meant to be a guardian of sacred ground. The Tornarsuk watched me stand up. For a moment, we looked at each other across the burial site. Then, slowly, the Great Spirit began to fade. "You have chosen well," it said as it disappeared. "But remember, the protection never ends. The vigil never breaks." And then I was alone with the dead. That was 42 years ago. I'm 80 now, writing this in a cabin I built at the edge of the valley. My hair is white, my hands are gnarled with arthritis, but I'm still here, still watching, still protecting. The official report said that Dr. Chen, Dr. Whitman, and Mike Torres were killed by extreme weather conditions during an unexpected blizzard. Their bodies were recovered and sent home to their families. I was listed as the sole survivor, suffering from severe frostbite and hypothermia. I let them think what they wanted to think. The burial site was declared off-limits after a convenient landslide buried it completely. The Park Service installed warning signs and rerouted all hiking trails away from the valley. As far as the world knows, there's nothing here worth protecting. But I know better. Over the years, people have tried to enter the valley. treasure hunters looking for archaeological sites, developers wanting to build lodges, scientists planning new excavations. None of them make it past the outer ridges. The Tornarsuk still walks these mountains. I've seen it many times over the decades, usually on clear nights when the aurora lights up the sky. It nods to me when our paths cross, acknowledging our shared purpose. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. I never married, never had children, never left this valley for more than a few days at a time. But then I think about what would have happened if I'd refused. How many more people would have died? How many sacred places would have been destroyed? The old ways aren't gone. They're just sleeping, waiting for people who remember how to listen. Last month, a young Inupiat woman named Anna came to visit me. She said her grandmother had sent her, told her there were things she needed to learn about protecting sacred places. I'm teaching her the old prayers, the traditional offerings, the signs that show when the spirits are restless. She's a quick learner, and she listens with respect instead of skepticism. I'm getting old. Soon I won't be able to maintain the vigil anymore. But Anna will take my place, and when her time comes, she'll find someone to follow her. The protection never ends. The vigil never breaks. That's what I learned in the Tornarsuk's domain. Some places are meant to stay wild. Some stories are meant to stay true. And some guardians are meant to stay forever. The mountains are quiet tonight. The aurora is dancing green and gold across the sky. Somewhere in the darkness, the spirit bear walks its ancient patrol. All is well in the valley of the dead. All is well. My name is James Thorndike, and I need to tell you about what happened in Alaska in 1976. I was a park ranger then, 44 years old, and I thought I knew everything about the wilderness. I was wrong about a lot of things. I grew up in Boston, went to Harvard, studied fish and ocean life. My family had money, but I wanted to do something real with my life. So I became a park ranger 18 years ago. I loved being outside, away from the city and all its noise. That summer, they sent me to Katmai National Park in Alaska. It's a wild place, 290 miles from the nearest big city. You can only get there by small airplane. The park sits on old volcanoes, and rivers run everywhere, full of salmon swimming upstream to make babies. My job was to watch the salmon at Brooks Falls and count how many there were. I also had to make sure the big brown bears didn't hurt any visitors who came to see them catch fish. Bears there are huge. Some weigh over 1,000 pounds. But they're usually more afraid of people than we are of them. I lived in a small research station right by the river. It was just me most of the time, which I liked. I had my cameras, my notebooks, and equipment to test the water. Every day I'd count fish, watch bears, and write down everything I saw. The work made me happy. The station had a radio to talk to other rangers, but sometimes it didn't work well. The mountains got in the way. At night I'd read books or look at my notes. The summer days were long there. The sun stayed up for 20 hours. It felt like being on another planet. I'd been there 3 weeks when other scientists came to help me. There were 4 of them, studying fish genetics, looking at salmon DNA to see how they were changing over time. Dr. Sarah Chen led the group. She was smart and careful, always checking her work twice. The team brought underwater cameras and other fancy equipment. They wanted to film the salmon in the deep pools where they rest before jumping up the falls. Sarah said they might discover something new about how salmon find their way home. But something felt wrong from the start. The local Yupik guide, an old man named Peter, kept warning us about the deep water. He'd point to the dark pools and shake his head. "Bad place," he'd say. "Things live down there. Things that take scalps." I thought he was just telling old stories. I'd studied folklore in college. Native people often had legends about water spirits and monsters. It was just their way of explaining things they didn't understand. Peter would bring us supplies once a week in his boat. Every time he'd warn us again. "Don't put your hands in the deep water," he'd say. "Don't swim there. Those things are hungry." Sarah and her team just smiled and nodded, but they didn't take him seriously. Neither did I. We were scientists. We believed in facts, not ghost stories. The first weird thing happened on a Tuesday. I was doing my morning fish count when I noticed something strange. Usually salmon swim everywhere in the river, jumping and splashing. But that day, they were all staying in the shallow water near the banks. The deep pools in the middle of the river were completely empty. I wrote it down in my notes, but didn't think much of it. Fish behavior changes all the time. Maybe the water temperature was different, or they smelled something they didn't like. But Sarah noticed it too. "The fish are acting scared," she said. "They won't go near the deep spots where we need to film." We tried moving our cameras to different places, but the salmon kept avoiding the deep water. It was like they knew something we didn't. That night, the radio made weird sounds. Static mixed with what sounded like voices, but not quite human voices. They sounded wet, like someone talking underwater. I figured it was just interference from the mountains or maybe a storm coming. But Peter heard it too when he came the next day. His face went white. "They're calling," he said. "The scalp takers are calling." I was getting tired of his stories, but something in his voice made me nervous. Peter had lived in Alaska his whole life. He knew things about this place that books couldn't teach. The real trouble started on Thursday morning. Sarah's team went out early to try a new spot downstream. They took the motorboat and all their underwater cameras. I stayed behind to do my bear counts. There were 12 big males fishing at the falls that day. Around noon, I heard the boat motor coming back. But it sounded wrong, like it was sputtering and choking. I walked down to the dock and saw the boat spinning in circles, nobody steering it. Sarah and her 3 team members were nowhere to be seen. I jumped in my smaller boat and went after the runaway motorboat. When I caught up to it, I found something that made my stomach drop. The steering wheel was covered in water, but not river water. This water smelled like the ocean, salty and thick with seaweed. All of Sarah's equipment was gone. The expensive underwater cameras, the computers, everything. But the boat had no holes in it. It wasn't sinking. How did ocean water get inside a boat on a freshwater river? I called on the radio for help, but got only that weird underwater sound again. This time I could almost make out words, but in a language I didn't know. I searched the river for hours. No sign of Sarah or her team. No equipment floating anywhere. It was like they had just disappeared. That evening, Peter came by with supplies. When I told him what happened, he sat down heavy in his boat and put his head in his hands. "I warned them," he said. "The Kalupiliwit got them." "The what?" "Kalupiliwit. They live underwater. They look like people, but they're not. They wear sealskin parkas and have long fingers for grabbing. They take scalps from people and keep them as prizes." I wanted to argue with him, to say it was impossible. But Sarah and 3 other people had vanished without a trace. The Coast Guard was coming tomorrow, but I knew they wouldn't find anything either. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing sounds from the river, splashing that was too loud to be salmon, too rhythmic to be bears. Around 3 in the morning, I heard singing. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. A woman's voice, pure and clear, singing a melody that made my heart ache. The song seemed to come from the deep pools where the salmon wouldn't go. I got dressed and walked down to the water. The singing got louder, more beautiful. All I wanted was to get closer, to see who was making such wonderful music. I was ankle deep in the river before I realized what I was doing. The water was freezing, but the song was so lovely I didn't want to leave. Something brushed against my leg, something with fingers. I jerked backwards and fell on the bank. The singing stopped instantly. Whatever had touched me slipped away with barely a splash. But I saw it for just a second in the moonlight. It looked like a person swimming, but wrong somehow. Too long, too thin, and it was wearing what looked like a dark coat with a hood, even underwater. I ran back to the station and locked the door. My hands were shaking as I wrote in my logbook. I was a scientist. I didn't believe in monsters. But something had grabbed me, and it definitely wasn't a fish or a seal. The next day, the Coast Guard came with boats and divers. They searched for 8 hours and found nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no trace of what happened to Sarah's team. The Coast Guard captain, a tough guy named Martinez, pulled me aside. "This happens sometimes in Alaska," he said quietly. "People just disappear. We tell the families it was an accident, drowning or hypothermia. But between you and me, some places are just hungry." After they left, I tried to pack my things. I wanted to go home, back to Boston where things made sense. But that night, I heard voices calling from the river. "James," they called. "James, help us." It sounded exactly like Sarah's voice. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the water's edge. "Sarah, where are you?" "Down here, James. In the deep water. We're trapped. Please help us." The voice came from the middle of the river, from the deepest pool. I shined my light on the water, but saw only darkness. "Sarah, swim to shore. I'll pull you out." But even as I said it, I knew something was wrong. Sarah was a strong swimmer, and the current wasn't that powerful. If she was really trapped, she would have called for help hours ago, not days later. The voice called again, sadder now. "Please, James, we're so cold down here, so hungry. Come help us." I almost did it, almost waded into that black water to save my friends. But something Peter had said stopped me. He'd told me the Kalupiluit were smart, that they could copy human voices to trick people. I backed away from the water. The calling got angry then, desperate. "James, don't leave us. Don't abandon us like you abandoned everyone else." That last part made me freeze. It sounded like Sarah, but Sarah didn't know about my past, about the mistakes I'd made that drove me to become a park ranger in the first place. Whatever was in that water, it wasn't my friend. The next few days were the worst of my life. I couldn't leave. The Park Service wanted me to stay until they could send a replacement. But I couldn't sleep either. Every night, the voices came back. Sometimes they sounded like Sarah and her team begging for help. Other times they were voices I recognized from my past. My ex-wife, my father, people I'd hurt or let down. The voices knew things they shouldn't know, said things that cut deep. During the day, I tried to keep doing my job. I counted salmon and watched bears, but my heart wasn't in it. The fish were still avoiding the deep pools, and now the bears seemed nervous too. They'd catch salmon in the shallow water but wouldn't go near the middle of the river. I started carrying a gun, even though it was against park rules. I didn't think bullets would stop whatever was out there, but it made me feel better. On Sunday, Peter came back. He took one look at me and frowned. "You look terrible," he said. "They've been talking to you, haven't they?" I nodded. I was too tired to pretend everything was normal. "My grandfather told me about them when I was young," Peter said. "The Kalapiluit have been here longer than people. They hunt in packs, usually 5 or 6 together. They're smart, patient. They learn about their prey before they strike. What do they want? Scalps. They collect them like trophies. But they also eat flesh and drink blood. They trade scalps with sea spirits for power, for the ability to live in both salt water and fresh water." I thought about the ocean smell in Sarah's boat. How do I fight them? Peter shook his head. "You don't fight them. You run. But they've marked you now. They know your smell, your voice, your fears. Running won't be easy." That night I decided to set up cameras around the dock. If something was coming out of the water, I wanted proof. I used my own equipment, mounting cameras on poles and trees, all aimed at the river. Around midnight, the singing started again. But this time it wasn't just one voice. It was a whole chorus, harmonizing in perfect pitch. The song was so beautiful, it made me cry. I found myself walking toward the door, wanting to go outside and find the singers. I forced myself to stay inside and watch the camera monitors instead. What I saw made my blood freeze. 5 figures were rising from the deep pool in the center of the river. They looked human at first glance, but as they got closer to shore, I could see they were wrong in every way. They were tall, maybe 6.5 feet, but thin like they'd been stretched. Their arms were too long, ending in hands with fingers like knives. They wore dark parkas with hoods that cast their faces in shadow, but I could see their eyes glowing like a cat's eyes in the dark. They moved through the water like it was air, not swimming but gliding. When they reached the shallow water, they stood up and walked onto the bank. Water ran off their clothes, but they weren't dripping wet. It was like the water was afraid to stick to them. One of them pointed at my station. It tilted its head, listening. Then it opened its mouth and Sarah's voice came out. "James, we know you're watching. Come outside. We want to show you something wonderful." I turned off all the lights and crawled away from the windows. But I could still hear them moving around outside, their wet footsteps on the wooden dock, their fingers tapping on the walls of my station. They stayed for 3 hours. Sometimes they sang. Sometimes they called to me in voices of people I knew. Toward dawn, they slipped back into the water and disappeared. When I checked the cameras the next morning, all the memory cards were gone. Somehow, they'd taken the recordings without breaking the cameras or leaving any trace. I radioed for emergency evacuation, but the dispatcher said the weather was too bad for planes. A storm was coming in from the coast, and I'd have to wait at least 3 more days. That afternoon, I found the first scalp. I was checking my fish traps downstream when I saw something pale underwater, caught on a rock. When I pulled it up with a stick, I almost threw up. It was human hair with skin attached, neatly cut like a wig. I found 4 more that day, all in the deep pools. Sarah's blonde hair, 2 from her male team members, and 1 I didn't recognize, probably from some poor tourist who'd disappeared years ago. The Kalapiluit were keeping trophies just like Peter had said. But why were they showing them to me now? What did they want? I got my answer that night. The singing started earlier, just after sunset. But this time, one of the creatures came alone. I watched through the window as it walked out of the river and up to my door. It was smaller than the others, more feminine in shape. When it knocked, the sound was gentle, almost polite. "James?" it said, and the voice was perfect. It was Sarah's voice, but calmer, sadder. "James, I need to talk to you. Please open the door." "You're not Sarah?" "No," it said, and now the voice was different, older, with an accent I couldn't place. "But I was human once, long ago. I understand your loneliness, your guilt. The others want to take you quickly, but I think we can make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "You have knowledge we need. You understand the salmon, the bears, the patterns of this place. Teach us, and we'll let you live. Refuse, and you'll join your friends in our collection." I pressed my back against the far wall. "What do you want to know?" "The Park Service sends people here every summer. We want to know when they come, how many, where they camp. You could radio them, tell them to stay away from certain areas, guide them to places where we can hunt safely." It wanted me to be bait, to lure other rangers and scientists to their deaths. "And if I refuse?" The thing laughed, and the sound was like ice breaking. "Look outside, James. Look at what we've prepared for you." I looked out the back window and saw my worst nightmare. The other 4 Kalapiluit had surrounded my station. Each one held a human scalp, fresh and bloody. They'd been hunting while I talked to their leader. "Campers," the thing at my door said. "A family with 2 children camping illegally downstream. We found them an hour ago. The children cried for their parents. Very touching." My hands shook with rage. Innocent people, killed because these monsters were playing with me. "You bastards. We are what we are, James. Predators. Just like the bears you study, just like the salmon that eat smaller fish. The only difference is that we're smarter. We plan, we negotiate. Join us willingly, and your death will be quick. Fight us, and we'll keep you alive for days." The singing started again, all 5 voices together. But now it sounded different to me. Not beautiful, but hungry. The sound of predators calling their prey. I had to make a choice. Work with them and betray everything I believed in, or fight them and probably die. But if I fought, maybe I could take some of them with me. Maybe I could warn others. I made my choice. I grabbed my rifle and kicked open the back door, shooting at the nearest Kalapiluit. The bullet hit its center mass, but instead of blood, black water poured out. The thing staggered but didn't fall. "Iron bullets," the leader said sadly. "How traditional. But we're not vampires, James. We don't die so easily." The wounded one straightened up, the hole in its chest already healing. But I noticed something. The black water smelled like sulfur, like the hot springs near the volcanoes. These things were connected to the old volcanic vents somehow. I ran toward the river, hoping to reach my boat. If I could get to the radio tower downstream, maybe I could warn people. But the Kalapiluit were faster than any human. They glided through the water and across land like gravity didn't apply to them. They herded me away from the boat toward a small island in the middle of the river. It was just a pile of rocks with some scraggly trees, barely 20 feet across. I splashed through the shallow water and climbed onto the rocks, gasping. The 5 Kalapiluit followed me, but stopped at the water's edge around the island. They could obviously swim, so why weren't they coming after me? "Clever," the leader said. "You chose the one spot we cannot reach easily. This island sits on an old, volcanic vent. The water around it runs hot in underground channels. We avoid heat when possible." I looked down and realized she was right. Even in the cold Alaskan summer, the water around the island felt warm. Hot springs were feeding into the river here, probably from the old volcanic system under the park. "But you cannot stay there forever," she continued. "And we are patient. We've waited decades for the right person to help us expand our hunting grounds. A few more days won't matter." As if to prove her point, the water level around my island started to drop. The Kalupiluit were doing something to the river, damming it or diverting it. Soon my little island would be connected to the shore, and they could walk right up to me. I had maybe an hour before the water got low enough. I used the time to think about everything I'd learned. These creatures avoided heat, but they could control water somehow. They lived in deep pools, collected human scalps, and hunted in packs. They were smart, patient, and had been here longer than humans. But they had weaknesses too. They couldn't reach the hot springs area. The salmon avoided them, and so did the bears. Even predators knew to stay away from these things. I thought about my marine biology training, about the creatures I'd studied in college. What lived in deep water, avoided heat, and could control water pressure? What kind of animal could mimic human voices and swim in both salt and fresh water? Then I remembered something from Peter's stories. He'd said the Kalupiluit traded scalps with sea spirits for power. What if they weren't just land-based? What if they were connected to something bigger, something in the ocean? The old volcanic vents didn't just heat the water around my island. They created a whole network of hot springs throughout this part of Alaska. If I could somehow redirect that heat, make it flow into the deep pools where these things lived. I looked around the island and saw something that gave me hope. Old pipes, rusted and broken, sticking out of the rocks. This had been a geothermal research station once, before the park was established. Scientists had tried to harness the volcanic heat for power. Some of the pipes were still connected to the underground hot spring system. If I could break the right ones, redirect the flow. "What are you doing, James?" The leader sounded curious, not worried. I didn't answer. I was too busy smashing rusted pipe joints with rocks, trying to remember my engineering classes from 30 years ago. Hot water was already bubbling up through cracks in the island, but I needed more, much more. The water level around the island kept dropping. I had maybe 20 minutes left. I found the main valve, corroded but still functional. It was designed to release pressure from the volcanic system in case of emergencies. I put all my weight on the wheel and turned. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then the whole island started to shake. Hot water erupted from a dozen places at once, steaming and bubbling like a geyser field. The temperature of the river around the island jumped from cold to scalding in seconds. The Kalupiluit screamed, not with human voices, but with sounds like whales dying. The hot water spread downstream, following the river's current toward their deep pools. "Stop!" the leader shrieked. "You don't understand what you're doing." But I did understand. The hot springs weren't just heating the water. They were connected to volcanic vents throughout the river system. I was turning their safe haven into a death trap. Two of the Kalupiluit tried to reach me anyway, but the moment they touched the superheated water, their skin started to dissolve. They thrashed and screamed, black liquid pouring from their bodies like ink. The other three retreated toward deeper water, but the hot springs were spreading. Steam rose from pools that had been cold for centuries. The river itself was turning into a giant hot tub. I watched from my island as the creatures that had killed Sarah and her team, and God knows how many others, died in agony. Part of me felt bad about it, but I remembered those fresh scalps, those murdered campers, and my guilt faded. The leader tried to speak one more time, her voice fading as the heat reached her hiding place. "Others will come," she gasped. "Deeper waters, the ocean." Then she was gone, dissolved like the others into black stains on the river bottom. I sat on my island for 3 more hours, until the volcanic pressure finally eased and the water started to cool. When I finally waded back to shore, I found something that made me sick to my stomach. The Kalapiluit's underwater lair had collapsed when the hot springs activated. Dozens of human scalps floated to the surface, some fresh, some ancient. These things had been hunting people for decades, maybe centuries. Among the remains, I found Sarah's research equipment. The cameras were ruined, but some of the data cards survived. When I played them back later, I saw footage of the Kalapiluit in their natural habitat, a vast underwater cave system connected to the ocean through underground tunnels. The leader had been right. There were others, deeper in the ocean. I'd only killed the hunting party that worked this area. The main colony was still out there, somewhere off the Alaska coast. The Park Service evacuated me the next day when the weather cleared. I told them about the volcanic activity, the hot springs activation, and the missing research team. I didn't mention the Kalapiluit. Who would have believed me? The official report listed Sarah Chen and her team as victims of a tragic drowning accident. The hot springs activation was blamed on natural volcanic pressure. The area around Brooks Falls was temporarily closed to researchers and limited to traditional use only. Peter nodded when he heard about the restrictions. Good, he said. Some places should be left alone. I never went back to Alaska. I couldn't handle the wilderness anymore, couldn't trust my own senses. Every time I heard water moving or saw deep pools, I remembered those glowing eyes and knife-like fingers. I moved back to Boston and got a job at an aquarium, working with fish in nice, safe, heated tanks. My colleagues think I had a nervous breakdown in Alaska. They're probably right, but sometimes I read news reports from coastal Alaska. Fishing boats that disappear without a trace, swimmers who vanish in calm water, native communities that suddenly avoid certain beaches and rivers. I know what's really happening. The Kalapiluit are still out there, still hunting. Maybe they learned from what happened at Brooks Falls. Maybe they're more careful now, more selective. I keep Sarah's research data in a safety deposit box in Boston. Someday, when I'm old and have nothing left to lose, I might publish it. Let the world know what's really swimming in those dark, cold waters off Alaska. But for now, I just try to forget. I take sleeping pills to avoid the dreams and stay away from any body of water deeper than a bathtub. Because I know they remember me too. The leader said others would come, and I believe her. Sometimes on quiet nights I hear singing in the distance. Beautiful, haunting voices calling my name. They're still hunting, still collecting, still waiting for the right moment to drag someone else down into the deep, dark water where the scalp takers live. And sometimes, God help me, part of me wants to answer that call. Part of me wants to walk into the ocean and join the collection, just to make the nightmares stop. But I resist. I keep living, keep remembering, keep watching the news for signs that others have seen what I've seen. Because someone has to remember Sarah and her team. Someone has to know the truth about what's really out there, swimming in the deep places where the light doesn't reach. My name is James Thorndike, and this is my warning to anyone who thinks they understand the wilderness. You don't. None of us do. Some things are older than humanity, hungrier than any natural predator, and smarter than we want to admit. They're waiting in the deep water, singing their beautiful, deadly songs. Don't listen to the voices calling from dark pools. Don't trust the singing in the night. And whatever you do, don't go swimming alone in Alaska. The Kalapiluit are still out there, and they're still hungry.